Hello and welcome. Today I just want to talk about what I see as the main issue when it comes to climate change and global warming, which seems to revolve around the issue of our influence over the level of CO2 in the atmosphere and what it means. So the so-called Goldilocks level of CO2, which is what they refer to as the pre-industrial revolution time, they say is 280 parts per million, which you could call, say, background CO2. And that figure, pre-industrial revolution, is at a time of around about 1760. And I'm picking 1760 just because it makes the maths very straightforward. So if you go back to 1760, as a species, we were burning fossil fuels at a great rate. Fires, we burnt coal, we burnt wood, we chopped down trees. All these things were used for cooking and for heating, especially in the northern hemisphere, which is where the majority of the population was. So even in 1760, per capita, we were actually putting out quite a high level of CO2 emissions per head of population. And the reality is that every single human being on the planet, whether directly or indirectly, puts out CO2 emissions. So I was thinking about this and I thought, okay, well, if you're a scientist in 1760 and you could actually measure the CO2 level at that particular point in time, and you're thinking, okay, what is it going to be in the future? Now, in 1760, the world's population was around about 770 million, and that's the figure I'm going to use just for the sake of this exercise. Now, it might be 750, it might be 800, but for the sake of this exercise, I'm just using 770 million as a way to simply calculate the mass. So, if the background CO2 levels in 1760 was 280 parts per million, and there's 770 million people in the world, that would mean that that's 0.77 billion. So if you think about today, we say, okay, well, today the population is at 7.7 billion people throughout the world. So if you just did some simple maths, it would indicate that the CO2 levels now should be at 2,800 parts per million. So 280 divided by 7.77 multiplied by 7.7 is 2,800. Now, I'm the first to acknowledge that that is a nonsense figure, because there are so many other factors that come into the whole issue of CO2 levels around the globe, and that includes how much CO2 the oceans can absorb, what the vegetation density is, movement of mountains, believe it or not, has an influence over CO2 levels. So there are so many variables. Now, at the moment, as of February 2019, our CO2 level sat at 411.75 parts per million. But what it does is it demonstrates, well, 2 points. And the first is that from 1760 to now, so we're talking 260 years, there's been a 1,000% increase in the human population on Earth. However, in terms of CO2 levels, there's been a 47% increase in CO2 levels. So there's a disparity between the increased level in population and with that industrialisation and the actual increase in CO2 levels. So obviously there are other factors here other than just human causes causing CO2 levels. There's got to be a lot of other different factors. I suppose that's the point. Yes, we are obviously contributing to it, but what is the real gain, and that's the unknown question. And the other point is, given the increase in population and this so-called Goldilocks level of CO2 at 280 parts per million, I just can't see how it would be possible for us to cut CO2 emissions to a level where we could get back to that 280 parts per million. And even if we tried to do that, would totally decimate all the economies of the world, because we'd have to totally eliminate all CO2 emissions. And that's something that we simply cannot do without ruining every single community around the planet. And it's just unrealistic to even try and contemplate that. So again, it's just a matter of looking at this with a bit more of a long-term attitude. It's taken us 260 years to get to this point. And I think the difference is between 1760 and now is that we now understand what it is that we're dealing with, and we know we have an issue. But it's taken us 260 years to get to this point, and it could well take another 30 to 50 years to work out a solution. And I will cover that a bit more in a couple of other videos. But that's all I wanted to say in relation to CO2 levels at this point. And in my next video, I'm going to be addressing a couple of other issues with relation to rises in sea levels. So thank you for watching. It's a short one, but I just thought they were interesting figures, and I'd just like to share them with you. Thank you for watching.